Hi guys, we are back with a new video, and today we are going to talk about another set of commands, Linux commands that we can use to make our life easier when using Linux. So first command that we are going to use for today is wget command. Wget. So what is wget command? What this command does is it basically helps you download data from a particular API or particular URL. So let's try to see how it does that. Let's say we have let's say we have a URL, this URL, and we want to download this. So what we're going to do is we want to download this. So we are going to write wget space that URL, and let's see what happens. It tries to download it. So it is saying that URL not found. Let's try to find some URLs. So suppose this is the URL that we want to download. So this downloads a zip GZ file, which is an extension uh, for a compressed file in Linux. And let's see what happens when we do this. It tries to download the file, and it is downloading. As you can see, it gave us a progress bar of how much data was downloaded, and let's see what data is present. So it is giving me a lot of data. Let's see. As we can see that the extension in this file was .gz. So let's try to find all the gz files in the given directory. So it shows that we have this SQL Astra hyphen 2020 1104 pentar.gz file. So this is how we download any zip file or any file from the internet. What we have to do is wget URL. Now let's try to extract this gz file. Gz is an extension for gunzip or a special compression format which is supported in Linux. So let's try to unzip this file. To unzip this tar files, we have a utility called tar, and we have to give xvzf. So what we have to give -x -v -z -f, and we have to give it the gz file that we want to unzip, or as we can say, the gz file that we want to untar. Let's try to do that. What happens? So it tried to unzip those files, and let's see what it gives us. So it has created a folder called SQL Astra. Let's try to see SQL star ls -l SQL star. So as you can see, it has created 3 files which are present in SQL Astra folder. Let's try to see ls-l ls-l. So we can see that it has created a new folder called SQL sh-astra. So this is the way we unzip or untar a given gz file. So we have to see 2 commands: wget to get data or to download a file or from a particular API or URL, and then we have seen tar command with a special set of instructions -x -v -z -f with the name of the gz file that we want to untar. It creates the directory which was present in the gz file. Now let's move on to another command. So we have seen wget and we have seen tar. Now let's try to find what are the basic commands that we have built up till now. These are the copy and move command. copy and move commands. So let's try to see what all files are present in the given folder. Let's try to find out all the text files that are present. ls start.txt. So we have filename.txt. So let's try to copy this filename.txt and see how we do that. cp is the command to copy something, whether it is a directory or a file. So cp source, this is the file name or the directory that we want to copy. In this case, we want to copy filename.txt to a new file. Let's say copy of filename.txt. So we have executed that. First argument is the source file or source directory, and second argument is the destination file or destination directory. Let's try to find out all the txt files in the given folder. So we have created copy of filename.txt. Let's try to ensure that we have the same contents. Cat filename.txt, it has this content, and cat copy of filename, and it has the same content. So this is how we copy a particular file. Now let's try to see how we move a file. So let's try to see first of all how to make a directory or a folder in Linux. That is one of the most basic commands that is done by mkdir. That means make directory. So let's suppose these are all the files that are present, files and folders present in the current directory. Now let's try to make a new folder in this mkdir, make directory mkdir test learning Linux. So let's see whether is it created or not. We can see that learning Linux has been created. Let's try to move to this directory or change directory to cd learning Linux. So cd is the command to change directory to another folder. So we have created a folder, we have changed to this folder. Now let's try to ls the contents which is present here. There is no content that is present here. So let's move back to our previous directory. This is cd ... that means move to the previous directory. And current working directory is what? pwd, which prints the current working directory. So it tells us that we are at the home. Inside home we are in OPC. Inside OPC we are in the folder learning Linux. So that is a current working directory. So cd ... means one directory before the current directory. That means ... will imply we should move back to change directory to one directory before the current working directory. So it will move us back to home OPC. So let's try to see that. Yes. Now let's try to print our working directory. It gives us we are inside the home OPC. Now let's try to do this again. cd ... and now let's try to print our directory. So it gives us that we are in the home folder. So we have changed our directory to the previous directory. Now let's again try to go back inside the home OPC by changing OPC. Right. So we are here. Now let's try to move our copy of filename.txt to the learning Linux folder that we have just created. ls-l learning. This is the folder that we have created. Let's try to move our copy of file. So before that, I would want to share with you a shortcut. Now let's suppose you had written a particular command and you want to execute that command again, but you have executed a couple of commands after that command. So if you want to search all the previous commands that you have executed on a given system, what you have to do is you have to type control. You have to basically press control and R key, R for rat. So it is going to create, I'm pressing control, then R key. Then it shows that we are in the reverse search mode. Now let's try to find the command that I'm looking for. txt. So it is showing that the command in which I had written txt anywhere is this. If I press Ctrl R again, it is going to provide me the second last command. If I press Ctrl and R again, it is going to give previous command. So that way I am going to find all the commands that I've executed one by one, and when I can type Ctrl R. So now, and if you find the command that you were looking for, you can just press enter. It is going to execute that command again. So we have seen that we have copy of filename.txt here. Now let's try to move this file to learning Linux folder. mv copy of filename.txt, and let's try to move it in the learning Linux folder. So if I'm not giving the file name when I'm specifying the destination, so this is the source that is being moved. This is the destination where source file is being moved, source folder is being moved. So when I'm not giving the destination, it is going to carry the same name. So let's first of all ensure that learning folder is empty. So we see that ls learning folder is showing no results. Now let's try to move that mv copy of file name and learning folder, learning Linux. Now let's try to find the contents again. Now we can see that learning folder, learning Linux folder has copy of file name txt present there. Now let's try to copy, let's try to move this file back to our current directory. So first of all, Control R, we are going to search the command txt that we are looking for. So pressing Control R and then typing the content, it is going to give you the previous command, and you can find all the previous command matching that content by continuously pressing Control R again and again. So we get ls-l star.txt. So let's try to copy or move copy of file name.txt back to our current folder. So what we're going to do is mv, it is present in learning.linux folder, learning Linux folder, copy of file name.txt, and we are going to do dot. What this dot signifies is it is going to copy this file to this directory. And what this dot means, it means current directory from where the user is running that command. So let's see what happens. Now let's try to find ls star.txt. So we can see that copy of file name.txt is present here. So these are the basic copy and move commands. Now let's try to move and copy folders. So let's try to copy this cp copy of filename.txt to learning Linux. So it is, let's see what happens, learning Linux. So a copy of this file is created in the learning Linux folder. Now let's try to copy this learning Linux folder, cp learning Linux, and let's try to copy this folder in the temp directory. Now let's see what happens. So it gives us a message. Now this is interesting. It gives us a message omitting directory learning Linux. So why does it give that? It gives it because cp command generally works on files, and if you want to copy a particular folder, we have to give it a special parameter cp-r. -r means that it is going to recursively copy that learning from Linux in the temp directory. So let's see what happens. So this command is executed. Now let's try to find out the contents of the temp directory. So we can see that learning from Linux folder has been copied to the temp directory. When we see the ls-l temp, we can see that learning from Linux has been copied in the temp directory. So this is how we copy a folder. Now let's try to move a folder. Let's create a folder to test the move command. This folder will be moved. So we are creating a new directory with the name this folder will be moved. Now let's try to find. So this is the directory that we have created. Now let's try to copy some file into this. So let's try to copy test file, or let's try to move this test file.txt to this folder will be moved. mv test file to this folder will be moved. So let's try to ls. So this test file.txt has been, which was present here, has been moved to this folder. Let's try to display the contents of this folder. So test file.txt is present here. Now let's try to move this folder to the temp directory. So what we are going to do is mv this folder will be moved to temp. Now let's see what happens. ls temp. So we have copied this folder, the folder whose name was this folder will be moved to the temp directory. Now let's try to see the contents of the current directory. Since we have moved that directory, so it is no longer present in the current directory. So in summary, copy command is used to copy a folder or a file from one location in the file system to another location in the file system, whereas move command is used to move a particular file or a folder from one location to another location in the file system. Now let's try to move on to another command. Now now we are going to look, we have covered pwd, and let's try to find a new command, rm. So let's try to see what is the content of the test file. So let's try to remove this file, rm test file. So this is the command rm to remove a file. So let's see what happens. Rm test file. So this file would have been moved. This file has been removed from the file system. So unlike normal Windows or normal GUI usage, in which when we remove a file, it is moved to a recycle bin, when we are using terminal, if we remove a particular file, if we do a rm space file name, it is removed from the file system forever. There is no way to recover it. So that is one of the disadvantages of removing using rm, but it has its own upsides, because if we are using that command, it means that we are doing it intentionally. So rm space file name is the way to remove a file. Let's see how we can remove a folder. So let's change our directory to temp, cd temp. Let's see what folders are present here. So we are going to remove the learning Linux folder, rm learning Linux. Now since learning Linux is a folder, it is not going to remove this, because it is showing that cannot remove learning Linux, it is a directory. So we have to give a special flag to the rm command, which is rm-r. R means recursively deleting all the contents of the directory and directory itself. So let's see what happens. So the command is run ls-l, and we can see that learning Linux folder is no longer present in our temp directory. So this is the rm command. Now, in advanced usages, we are going to encounter scenarios in which we want to save some variable or some information in a variable in Linux or in shell scripts, because shell script is basically collection of commands that we want to run sequentially, or collection of commands that we want to run together. So a way to create variables is export some var, or whatever name you want to give your variable, to 123. So we have created a variable some var which is present in the current shell session. So current terminal that we have opened, it is present, and how we can see value of this variable, we are going to use echo command, and variables are always used with $sign. Whenever we want to use some variable, we address them with $sign. Let's see what is the content of this variable. So it is showing that content of some var is echo, some var is 123. So let's try to use it in a better way. Echo hello dollar somewhere. Now let's try to see what happens. So it is giving me hello 123. So for example, if I want to change the contents of somewhere to some other thing, now let's try to export somewhere equals world. And now let's try to see when we echo hello dollar somewhere, what happens. It gives us hello world. So export is the command to save some value in some variable in the Linux context, and when we want to use that variable, we have to use dollar and the name of the variable. So in this case, we can use in this way we can use variables in Linux. So the power of variables really amplify when we are writing shell scripts. When we are going to use shell scripts, or when we are going to discuss shell scripts, they will become more clear. So now let's move on. So we have covered export and echo. Let's try to understand the netstat command. Now this is a very interesting command, netstat. So it gives us the statistics of the, so every Linux instance or every server has, let's say this is our server. This is our server which is hosting, and I am connecting to this server from my personal laptop, and we have multiple programs that are running on this server. So when multiple programs are running on a server, we have to interact with some of the programs. For example, let's say our web application is running on this server. This is the web application program that is running on the server, and we can get list of all the programs that are running on a server with ps command, ps-aux. These are the parameters that we give to the ps command, and we have our web application which is running on port 80. Okay, let's say we have our application running on port 3000. So before that, I am going to tell you what a port is. So port is nothing but an imaginary mouth of a server. We can say port is a mouth of a server, and a server can have multiple ports. A server can have multiple ports, and outside world as well as inside applications can interact with other applications. For example, there is one application which is running on port 3000, This application is running on port 3000, and let's take this application is running on port 2000. This application is running on port 2000, and they are doing their own stuff, and they want to interact with one another. So how this interaction happens is this port is let's take this is port 3000 and this is port 2000. These are basically mouse of the server, and what happens is let's take this application wants to interact with this application. So one of the ways in which this interaction can happen is this application is going to interact with it via this port. So it is going to send message on this port, and the application which was running on this port will get that message, and it can consume that message and give a reply to the application which was calling it. So in this case, we have seen that applications running on the same port, same instance, can also interact with other applications running on the same instance. Now let's try to see another scenario. Let's take, we have our web server. This is a server, and we have an application which is running on port 80, and this application is bound on port 80, and a person wants to open his browser. So whenever you write http / google.com, what happens? What happens is http signifies that we have to contact servers signified with the name google.com on port 80. HTTP means port 80, or rather we can say HTTP is a protocol which google.com understands, protocol or a language which google.com understands, so that we can interact with servers behind google.com or servers hosting google.com in a standard interaction language called HTTP. It's basically machine interaction language. We can say that in layman terms, machine interaction language. So google.com is called domain name. Google.com is called domain name, and HTTP is called protocol. And so domain name is a pretty way of saying, of giving address of the servers. So for example, we have google.com. Let's try to find out IPs of servers where google.com is hosted. NSLOOKUP is the command, google.com. So whenever we give NSLOOKUP google.com, NSLOOKUP basically means name server lookup of domain name google.com. Let's see what it gives. It gives us the IPs of the servers which are hosting google.com. So this is IPv4 notation. This is IPv6 notation. So a server can have IPv4 notation or IPv6 notation, or a combination of both, as in this case. Let's try to see another lookup of addresses. NSLOOKUP ODC jobs.in. So it is giving me only IPv4. In IPv4, there is each character, each number between the dots can have values from 0 to 255. Okay, that is the case, and in IPv6 that number is higher. So I'm not going to discuss IPv4 and IPv6 here, but the idea is IPv4 is an address of a server. of a machine, we can say. So what is the address of Google servers? It is google.com 142 251 42 46. So this is server where google.com is hosted, and we are contacting on port 80. And you may have seen cases where the URL is https://google.com. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secured. So it is basically saying that in HTTP, the data is not encrypted by default when we are sending our request from browser or curl or whatever way we are calling that API to the server. So if a request is happening from browser to port 80 of the server or HTTP port, HTTP is the frequently used for 80 port is the frequently used port for HTTP. It is a standard HTTP port, but you can run your site on any other port as well. So for example, if you can if you're saying that I don't want to host my site on port 80, I'm going to host my site on port 90, that is also fine, but it is going to break the conventions that are used across the industry for HTTP port. Across the industry or across the world, port 80 means HTTP port for API calling or for browsing. Port 443 means HTTPS. For port 22 means port for SSH connections, through which we connect to our remote servers, and there are multiple other services which are running and have their dedicated standard ports. You can run your services on non-standard ports as well. You can say that I don't want to use port 80, I want to host my site on port 90. That is also fine, but it is going to break the convention that is followed throughout the industry. So you're going to face some issues when you are integrating with other services. Besides that, there is no problem in hosting your application on any port. That is your choice. So for example, when we do HTTPS google.com, google.com is the pretty way of saying the IP. So for example, let's say if you had to visit google.com, and every time you had to visit google.com, you had to write this IP. So it was cumbersome to remember this number because they are random numbers, and these random numbers can change. For example, today you have this IP, and next day, let's say you have two more servers, so you're going to get two more IPs. So today your IP is IP1, I1. Next day you're going to get I2. Next day you're going to get I3. And suppose this I1 crashes, so you have to remove this I1 IP, and that way you had to remember, humans had to remember IPs, which was not a good way. So what they did was they designed DNS servers. So what this DNS service does is it translates a human readable name to an IP. It translates google.com to this. So whenever I write google.com in the browser, whenever I do, this is suppose this is my browser and I write google.com. So what my browser internally is going to do, it is going to check, or not my browser, but my request is going to go to a router or my ISP, and it is going to go to google.com, and it is going to give me the IP address, and then I am going to go to that IP address. So for example, in this case, it was this. So my request is, then I'm going to send my request to this IP address, and on the port 80 or port 443, depending it is HTTP or HTTPS, and then Google servers, this is the Google server, it is going to give me response, and then my page is going to load in my browser. So this is the way this works, and google.com is basically a human readable way of remembering IPs of particular services or servers. So for example, let's try to find out IPs of facebook.com, and let's look up facebook.com. What we get? We get IPv4 and IPv6. So this is the IP of Facebook servers, where Facebook is running its applications. So let's say that we have this server, and it is running multiple services. Let's say this service is running on port 2000. Let's say this is running on port 3000. This process is running on port 80, and this process is running on port 22. This process is running on port, let's say, 443. Okay, so this is port for SSH connection. This is port for HTTPS connection. This is port for HTTP connection, and this is port for, this is a non-standard port. So there are two types of ports. One is standard port. So these standard ports are basically industry conventions that if you want to run a web server, you will run it on port 80 so that everyone can understand. And if you want to interact with another web server in a far off land, you know that if you want to interact with this server over HTTP, you know that you will interact on port 80 and it is going to understand it if it is following the convention. And if it is not following the convention, then you have to have a prior knowledge that this server is not following the convention, and let's say this server is running HTTP on port 90. So when you want to interact with this server or you want to talk to this server, you are going to send a HTTP request or HTTP call or HTTP message on port 90. So these are the applications that are running on a server. Now, how are we going to know what applications are running on the server? So for that, we have ps command to know that what processes are running, and there are multiple arguments like ps -a -u and -x to know what processes are running on the command on the server. But how do we know that what ports are being on what ports our server is listening, and what are the applications that are running on these ports? So what is the way to debug it? What is the way to know this information? Now this information is found out using the netstat command. Now this all pre-information was required so that you can understand netstat command better. Now let's try to find out what application is now let's try to find out netstat -alntp. I'm going to explain it to you what all these things does, what all these input arguments -a -l -t what all these arguments mean. So bear with me for a few moments. Now let's try to run this output. So it is giving me a lot of information which is difficult to understand or difficult to comprehend at this moment. Now let's try to see one by one. First of all, let's see the first line. This first line indicates what is the protocol. I'm going to cover protocol shortly, but consider this. So try to ignore this at the moment. We are going to ignore receive queue and send queue also at the moment. Let's look at the local address and the foreign addresses. This is important piece of information. Now, local information, local address, what does it mean? It means that something is running on my instance, local means current instance. So if I am logged in to this server, so in this context, local means this server, the server on which I am logged in. So something is running on port 443. Something is running on port 37763. Something is running on port 9003. Something is running on port 6379. Something is running on 111. Something is running on port 80. Something is running on port 20. I'm going to cover this 127.0.0.1 and 0.0.0.0 as well. So, and this way we can see that different things are different applications or different things are running on and listening on particular set of ports. So if you can see that something is running on local port 3000, okay, and so this is, but still we are not able to find what is running on this port. Now let's try to run this command again with another set of input -p. So what -p does is it gives the process that is running on a particular port. Let's try to do that. That is going to give us much clearer picture. With this, let's see this. We are going to cover the obvious ones first. So this, as you can see this, on port 22 on the local machine means the current machine I am logged in. On port 22, what is running? SSHD. That is the SSH daemon which provides us the functionality to SSH to a remote server, or in this case the current machine that I am logged into, and it is running with the process ID 9249. This means process ID and the name that is running, name of the program that is running on that particular port. So let's see another thing. Let's see this SSH OPC. Yes. So what does it signify? It signifies that on port 22 of the local machine, someone is connected from this IP address, and what program is running? SSH. This is running SSH with the process ID of 15569. Now let's try to find the process ID or more information about this program with the PID 15569. How are we going to do that? We are going to write yes -a -u -x, and we are going to do grep 15569. So it is showing that the process ID 15569 has this. So this SSH command, SSHD program is running on 15569 process ID. Similarly, different programs are running on this machine, and we can know which programs are running on this machine and on which port they are listening to. Now this is a very interesting thing. So you have seen that what was the IP of the google.com. We can see that by Control R, and we had recently run google.com. So I'm going to search who, and it is going to give me the last command containing GOO, and it is the nslookup command. I'm going to press enter. It is going to give me the IPs of google.com. I'm going to copy them. So this is google.com. So let's say this is our server. So this is a server with the let's see what we're trying to do. This is IP of google.com, and let's try to find out our public IP. How are we going to do that? Public IP is curl ifconfig.me. This ifconfig.me is a website to which if you call with a curl command, it is going to give you your IP address. So it gives me my IP address as this. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it here. I'm going to denote it as my IP address, and then I'm going to, this is my server, and this is google.com. This is running on port 443 or HTTPS. This is HTTPS. And let's try to open google.com. So you can see that here it is giving me HTTPS www.google.com. So what happened during this event when I typed HTTPS google.com? So now let's try to do it from here, because I am giving my IP address as this. So curl google.com. So it gives me HTTPS. So it gives me some data. But what happened during this when I called google.com is, first of all, my server tried to find from the DNS server, domain name server, what google.com means. It is going to say what is IP of google.com. It is going to give me this IP. Then the application that is running. So for example, I ran the curl command, curl google.com. So when I'm running a particular command, it is going to create a process for it. So let's take this process was P1. This P1 is going to call 443 port of this API, of this server. Now, whenever two servers are trying to interact, or two systems are trying to interact, so we know that google.com is being approached on port 443, but my server is also speaking to this server via a particular port. So this is the source port. So for example, this P1 was let's take 32779. Okay. So all the communication between two servers is done from one IP address. This is the IP address. From one IP address and port to another IP address and port. So all the communication between two devices or two systems is done with IP plus port to another IP plus port. IP is basically address of a particular server or instance, and port is basically address of the process that is running on that server. So each process will get its dedicated port through which it can speak or hear, and similarly IP and port. IP is the address of the machine and port is the address of the process that is running on that machine. So this IP plus port combination is called socket. So whenever we say that two servers are interacting, this server two servers are interacting or two machines are interacting. That is a better way of saying. If we say two machines are interactions, this is machine 1 and this is machine 2, then a socket is a connection between two sockets is happening. Socket is IP plus port and IP plus port. In case of standard communication like HTTP or HTTPS, the ports are standard listening ports. So if in this case, when I am opening google.com in my browser, in this case the machine is my local system. On my local system, this is my local system or local laptop. In this system, I have a process of a browser. Okay, its browser's process ID is P1. This is interacting with google.com. On port 443 and HTTPS or port 443, standard HTTPS 4. So this browser is requesting my local system to provide a particular port. So local system provides it a temporary port or any port, let's say 12995. Browser requests the local system to provide it a temporary port through which it can speak to google.com, and once google.com returns the response, browser has got the information, it can release this IP address back to the local system. So for example, let's say another browser or another tab, in another tab we want to we want to talk to facebook.com. So what we can do is a local system browser or another tab is going to request the local system again. This process ID is P2. It is going to request local system to provide it another temporary port. So browser is going to, not browser, local system is going to assign it another temporary port. Let's take 6975, and through which it is going to interact with facebook.com server on a particular port. So every time two systems are interacting, there's always combination of IP plus port on the source side and IP plus port on the destination side, and IP plus port combination is called socket. So whenever two systems are interacting, there is always a connection from one socket to another socket. Okay, and we have got the information how to check what process is running on a particular port through netstat command. We can check, for example, you can see that on port 8081 a process is running on with PID 2971 and it is giving me node. So let's try to find out what is running on port 27971, or what piece of code is running on 27971. So what we are going to do is ps-aux grep 27971. So this is the process ID, and what is running? It is running server index.js. So this is the program that is running on port 8081. That is how you can find out what piece of code is running on a particular port on a given server. So that was it, friends. That is all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have fun. Take care. Bye bye.